me luck. Okay, so now next is Michael Clarke, and it is the, I've rehearsed this, the work of madmen that makes the methods of mathmen work, practically occasioned segment design.
I didn't realize how long it was until I had to make the slide. And I think we have the longest and probably the shortest titles in this session, and I have the longest, clearly. And so my name is Michael Clarke, and I work at Google on the ad side of the business, and I'm also completing my PhD at the University of Waterloo in sociology in Canada. And to give you the background for why I have this cheesy title, it's incredibly long. There's a discussion that's going on in the advertising domain right now related to two different approaches to successful ads. Whether those should be two different categories is another question. One on the left-hand side is Mad Men. So a lot of you are probably very familiar with the television show Mad Men. You have a bunch of folks back in the 60s that were working on advertising, and a lot of what they did was based on intuition and gut feel. And recently, companies like us have worked at an approach towards advertising that is much more technical, looking at statistics, and a lot of people are talking about automation of advertising. This is referred to as math men. So if you were to take a look at Mad Men and if you did a search for Mad Men versus math men in advertising and mainstream media, you would see a lot of arguments that suggest that one is taking over the other, or everything is moving towards a math men world in advertising. And what I'm here to do today to talk about is user segmentation and grouping people according to a set of characteristics within the context of this debate. And this is a very important component of advertising. I'm using segmentation as a very general term. It includes things like personas. It includes other ways that people actually group people to accomplish something in a business or a product standpoint. But what I want to do within the context of this debate is look at collaborative work practices in addition to the technical work that's been discussed from a mathman standpoint. So if you look at the right-hand side, that could very easily be someone at Google, taking a look at, technically how can I actually go and approach people in a much better way. But there hasn't been as much attention on the collaborative work practices that actually go together with these technical approaches. So related work in the literature, this is a gross oversimplification. We can check my paper to see all the nitty-gritty details, but there's really three domains that have looked at this broader notion of segmentation: design literature, economics literature, and marketing literature. And you can really boil down the two approaches to segmentation as the ability to select the right base of people or create the right segment according to the right criteria. And the second is the statistical veracity of those segments. So, are they objective and are they valid? Once you've actually determined, what you're going to do, was I able to statistically make this, something that was, very solid? Where the gap is practical reasoning used to create and deploy segments, and I'm looking at this from an advertising perspective. Some other related work that has been an influence for me is ethnomethodological work on social science in the workplace. So social scientists going about creating models and grouping people for social science work, describing what they do, the practical work that they do to actually accomplish this. And also design work undertaken in light of user and customer concerns. So Martin et al. And Sherrick and Anderson showed how design work actually occurs when you have users and customers as a scenic feature. So I want to give you a bit of an overview because this is a pretty foreign setting to many of you probably. What I did was I went and I looked at Google as a workplace and specifically as it relates to segmentation. And really you can boil this down again very simply to four areas. On the left-hand side you have engineering and product management. So simply speaking, they enable the technical possibilities of going out and reaching people with advertising. So all the different possibilities of ways that you could actually go out and slice and dice how you would approach people with advertising. The two folks in the middle have a very technical job as well because it's a very complex space with a lot of new technology that people aren't very familiar with, and a lot of times they're engineers as well. So you have product specialists and analysts and a client team that is, put simply, sales folks. And so what their job is to take an advertising customer's requirements and translate those into analytical models so that you can actually go out and implement a segmentation exercise with advertising. So this is, what the setting of the workplace looks like. So I also want to clarify one thing as well. I'm going to be using the word customer and audience or user, and these can be mixed up pretty easily. So audience or user are the people that are actually consuming the advertisements, whereas the customer is the advertiser. In terms of some of the technical options that can be used to design segments for ad campaigns, again, I'm going to boil these down into four pretty simple categories that are pretty well known in the advertising industry. The notion that you can take web signals and develop affinity categories. So for example, you can go and take a look at what people's interests are on the web and bucket sports enthusiasts, for example, and that can give you the context for delivering advertising to someone in a particular way. The second is sort of a subset of the first, so commerce-related actions. So are people actually doing stuff on the web that suggests that they want to go and buy a particular product, and that can be a subset of this broader category. The third is search trends, and these aren't mutually exclusive, but looking at aggregate search behavior and things like Google Trends and other tools that are used by agencies and advertisers to see what type of affinities are there in terms of people searching for, in this case, it's very small, but on the top left is Jean-Claude Van Damme and the Volvo brand, and many of you have probably seen the advertising that's related to this. You can start to learn things in aggregate about users and address them in a different way with advertising as a result to give the user a better experience from that advertising, but also accomplish your advertising goals. And the last piece is locations and devices. So, if you're in Seoul and you speak Korean, having a Korean advertisement is better than having an English advertisement in a lot of cases. And whether you're on your mobile phone, watching television, or on your laptop, that's going to be a different context for you to receive advertising. So these are sort of the four big buckets that I considered in the workplace. So the method. What I did was, I've spent 3 years in that particular part of the business, but separate from that, I did ethnographic observation of client workers and these product analysts preparing for advertising client meetings at Google. And I had an ethnomethodological orientation when I did that. So the findings. So what I did was looked at beyond statistical, evaluative, and technical segment work. There were four really big themes that I identified. Segments don't stand free as a technical entity, so they're not passively consumed and then implemented automatically. That whole idea of practical work, not just automation being handed down to teams and a programmatic universe of just delivering advertisements through technology. Practical segmentation work is not determined in advance, and it happens in situ. Customers can't be in a room at all times, obviously, even if we'd like them to or they would like to as well. So there's really the impossibility of exhaustively determining their point of view. So a lot of interpretive work is undertaken in order to account for this. The omnipresence of the advertiser. So we saw these workers seeing the customer in the segmentation model to actually make it work. And I'm going to show you a couple examples of cases of this. So the first one I like to call customer palatability. So this is a way that they actually oriented to the customer, and I'll go into the details of what I mean by this exactly. But the case was analysts had come to the meeting with the client managers, and they had proposed a model for a set of customers to address mobile shoppers as a best practice for a group of retail advertisers. So they came in and they said, we're noticing something about aggregate behavior of people that suggest that there's shopping signals that say mobile product research is happening on the weekend in a unique way from desktop versus during the week. And so they took that and they said, I think there's probably a good opportunity to work with advertisers to have really relevant ads for people. If we look at this behavior and scale it out. What I found was they were turning to new analytical model options based on the notion of whether the advertiser was actually palatable to this. And they did this in a very interpretive way. So they made tangible segment decisions, determined gradually and discursively. They had non-empirically verifiable methods of reasoning, so they didn't go out and survey the customers. They didn't go and ask them for every single little decision point. But they were able to invoke them without doing that in a way that was very effective. So they acted as lay sociologists. So here's a couple examples. So they referred to the advertiser not for their own sake, but again, level of palatability. They treated customer cases as evidence of a broader underlying pattern when they were doing this work. So they were making smart assumptions based on past work with different customers. Here's an example of a quote. They are stereotypical. They say we understand mobile is important, but have no real understanding of what it does for us. They also approached this as removing artifacts from the model. So segment elements were not evaluated exclusively for correctness. They weren't simply just saying this model's correct, this model's technically correct, these stats are right. They actually went and looked at comparisons of what they thought would be a palatable model to the advertiser, and looked at that as like a pragmatic move, and did that in an interpretive way rather than sticking to statistics. So a quote was, "But if you look at last click, the segmentation model will not work. Can we figure something else out?" So they had an advertiser that they were using as the example that looked at conversions beyond a last click of the advertisement. That's a typical way that advertisers can work, and they used this as a case of a broader underlying pattern, and proceeded with a pretty successful solution for a broader group of customers as a result. So the second piece is interpretively choosing bases. So in this case, we had a tech advertiser. They had very vague specifications for what they wanted from the advertiser. So a lot of times you'll have advertisers that don't quite understand the technology. It's pretty complicated. So you have all these layers of different technical people that need to do these translations. So sometimes you'll get some pretty vague direction, and you'll have to work out all those different details. So an analyst created a quantitative blueprint for a segment to go out and reach those audiences, and brought it to a session with the client manager to work through the details of how we could actually make this happen. So for this base selection, I saw people had the artful ability to work through a myriad of base attributes by interpretively invoking the customer in various ways. And they turned to something called the typified customer, which really allowed them to have, even though they had very diverse roles, diverse biographies, diverse histories, they were able to collectively come to a solution through typification or types. So here they really take seriously how they draw and share taken for granted common sense knowledge to know what's going on and make decisions. So I saw them concurrently draw on user actions and customer knowledge as resources to make those decisions. And one really clear example of this, there's several more in the paper, was drawing on a typified customer. They deprioritized the notion that people were very interested in customer service as part of a broader segmentation exercise. So they were saying, we want to segment people according to purchase interest of our product. We think that customer service may be one of those. The analysts came to the meeting, but through talk, they were able to determine that this is something that should be deprioritized. They didn't go and ask the customer, but based on their past experience, their typified view of the customer, they were able to interpretively work that out and build to a solution. And so the quote is, "What is a user action? Maybe customer service I wouldn't use, because if I was in the room, I would probably question that." So they're invoking assumptions about the customer and using that as a case to make those decisions. So discussion and design direction. I think there's a really big opportunity to make customers more considerable. I'm calling it an ad buying and reporting platforms. So if you look at this little representation on the bottom right of the screen, that's an AdWords platform. It's a pretty popular ad buying technology. And a lot of the work that's done with this types of technology is taking a look at the user and only the user. There's maybe some stakeholder involvement, but the primary dominant view is saying, I can target these people in particular types of ways and there's all these different features and possibilities, and you have to work that out in relation to the customer. But then you have a separate set of work that's being done in software as a service through customer relationship management software. So the whole idea there is to track your relationship with the customer over time, and see what you need to do with that particular business. And I think there's an opportunity for those two things to come together. So you can have intelligence on the stakeholder versus just showing the user. And the idea here would be to create what I call advertiser intelligibility views. Probably not a marketing name, I get it. But here they could better contextualize customer receptivity, aptitude, maybe stated corporate priorities, stuff that they put out on the web as it relates to their own marketing, so that you could start to dynamically look at these segments and do so from the context of pulling in that customer rather than just looking at the user itself. So that's it. I guess if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.